All right, hello everyone, and welcome to part two of the how to create a web application tutorial. My name is Trevor Page, and I will be taking you through the next steps in fine-tuning and customizing your web application. So what I'm going to cover is I'm going to strip out everything that we did, or most of what we did for the Spring Roo code and the views that it automatically created. Okay, the views are great, but I want to customize the view and the functionality of the code in such a way that I will be able to tailor it to my client's needs or whatever the case may be. I'm going to talk a lot about controllers, how they're used, and I'm going to show you how to create a service for your controller, as well as a DAO, which is a data access object. And I'm going to show you some best practices around how to use those. And at the end, I'm going to spend a little bit of time showing you how to actually link your web app up to your database with some actual custom code that you can use, and so that you can tweak your queries to your heart's content. Okay. This is a bit longer than the last presentation. This should take about an hour and a half, and it's lengthy because I'm going into as much detail as I can with the topics that are covered. Okay, but the objective here is I want you to be able to create your Spring Roo application, your web application. Okay, get it up and running real quick. And then be able to also go through and customize it, so that you can do this as a repeatable process. You can start fresh and create a new web application as desired. And if you ever get stuck, you can go back and look at this video and make sure that you didn't miss one of the steps to getting yourself to a point where you can launch your next web application. So. I'm going to try to teach you some best practices with respect to, naming conventions and basically how I go about doing, simple things like Google searches to troubleshoot problems that I run into. All right. So now let's jump right into the content. What I want to do here is I want to strip out some of the automatically generated stuff that we had essentially received or had been gifted by Spring Roo. It's great stuff, but the presentation layer, I find I like to strip that out and make it more tailored or customized to my particular client. If I'm working for a particular client, or if I'm working at just a regular 9-to-5 job as a web developer. The default Spring Roo stuff just doesn't work because it has all of its own branding and everything. So let me just show you what I mean. Let me go into the My First Web App. So this is what I'm talking about. This is the Spring stuff, and it's great because you can go and create a new user and list the users and whatnot, and that will go and get stored in a database, which is great. But it's just not very useful for a real-world scenario. So it's great for getting all the code set up so that everything's working and good to go, but now let's replace it. So what I generally do is I look in the views folder is where all of these presentation layer things are. These are all views, and they're all stored here. So I mean, really, I just delete the whole directory, and I actually delete. I believe I delete all these tags. Let's see. This I need to keep because this is important for our configuration. But yeah, layouts, internationalization. I think I delete all of this stuff. So let me go ahead and do that. Although, is the web XML contained inside of view? No, it isn't. Okay, good. So let's delete all this stuff. And we should probably turn off our server in the meantime so it doesn't try to chug along. Styles I'll keep. images. I don't think I need any of these images because they're all from the Spring stuff. Although I like to have an images folder, so I'll just delete all the images inside of the images folder. And this is good. So we've now deleted all of the sort of presentation layer stuff. So if we were to start up our application again, you'll probably see that nothing works. What it'll probably do is just give us a 404 exception because it can't find the view it's looking for, or it might just throw an exception right when it boots up. Okay, because it's trying to render a layout. So this layout stuff is probably part of a configuration file. Would I be able to decipher what configuration file from the error? I don't think I can. I see tiles. So let's. I can do a search for tiles, but I don't think it'll come up with anything. No. So let's just go through our typical configuration file. So this is. I'm just going to give you I haven't prepared for this in any way, shape, or form. So you're going to get the unedited raw first run through of how I would strip out the the default Spring stuff so that I could create my own views and whatnot. So bear with me here. So I'm going to go through the important configuration files that I know are important because I've dealt with Spring before on a very constant basis. So WebXML is definitely an important configuration file. So I'm going to scan this file and see if I can see anything to do with the tile stuff or any sort of templating stuff. And nothing pops out. Another thing I could do is look for the word template. So sorry, I'm going too fast there. I went to search file, and I'm just going to do a search for template. Now I can do star, or I can do star.jsp, and put in star.java and limit my search that way. But it's not a very big project, so if I just search everything, it won't take too long. So I see some stuff in the WebXML with respect to templates. Those are all meme types, so I don't think that's what I'm interested in. Oh, that's in the Spring source anyway. That's not. That's in servers. That's not what I want. Okay, so there's no reference there. What if I do a search for tiles? Okay. So I do get a hit inside of the web MVC config inside of the Spring folder, which is right here. So I can double click on this, or I can just double click right here, and it takes me right to the line that it found. So it's using a URL-based view resolver. I'm not sure if I could just rip that out. Multi-part. I can try to rip this out and see what happens. This is what programming is, ladies and gentlemen. It's all trial and error, unless you go and do all the research ahead of time. But that's not exactly my particular style. I'm more of a trial and error. So let me just comment this stuff out. The shortcut key there for commenting everything out is Control-Shift-C. So you can do Control-Shift-C and you can hit it back and forth and it'll comment and uncomment your code. Nice quick shortcut for those who like to use shortcuts. So now I've modified an XML file, so I need to reboot my server. Let it go. Still booting up. I suppose I'll see if it fails miserably with those errors. Now I didn't see any errors this time, so that's sort of promising in the sense that it's not completely broken. So if I go to my first web app, see, this is what I expected to see, is a 404 because it can't find the file that it's looking for. And you see this error, resource not found. Check your view resolver setup. See, this is what I'm wondering if I think I need an actual view resolver itself, a URL-based view resolver. I don't know. I don't think it has to be a tiles view resolver. Perhaps what I could do is one common thing that I use whenever I'm running into problems is I just look at the error itself, and I really just kind of copy paste it into Google, and see what Google says. So let's try that. Paste it right in. Nada. So why is that? Is there anything specific? So there's some specifics here. Circular view path. Interesting. Someone's trying to create a Roo application. Interesting. I am using Chrome. That is quite interesting. I've never heard of that before. So let me try and boot up my Firefox and see if this actually works, or at least works in the sense that I get just a regular 404. So what is that? Localhost 8080, and it's my first web app. So I get the 404. Let me clear my console here by clicking the clear console icon. So I still get the same thing. So I think it's something to do with my setup, and that's okay. That's kind of what I expected. So let me assume right now that all is well, which I don't think is the case because I think I do need a view resolver of some sort. But let me just plow on with the regular stuff that I wanted to show you guys, and just see if I still encounter any problems. So what I want to do here is I want to give my own presentation layer type of stuff. I want to give my own view, my own JSP to show when I navigate to the my first web app URL. So I want to show just a simple web page that allows you to log in. So it shows, what's your username, what's your password, and submit. Simple web page to do that. So what I would do is I like to have an actual JSP folder inside of my webinf. So as you saw, most of the presentation layer stuff, or if not all the presentation layer stuff, is contained within the web INF directory. So I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm just going to call it JSP, because that's where my JSPs are going to go. And I believe I need to now change a configuration option so that it knows to look in the JSP folder, but we'll get there. And I'm just going to create a new JSP file. Do I have JSP in my list? Perhaps I do. I can't see it right now, so I'm just going to say file. And I'm going to say, let's call it, I don't know, index.jsp. And that's interesting. I don't know why that error's there. Let me get rid of the search here. Get more room. Interesting. Okay. I'm not used to seeing the visual source tab. I usually just look at the source view. So, JSPs. JSPs are essentially HTML files, but they allow you to actually have some Java code in there as well. For now, I just want to make a standard HTML web page, just to make sure that when I hit the URL that I'm shooting for, which is the my first web app URL, that it will just forward to the index.jsp page and show it appropriately. So for now, I'm just going to create a standard HTML page, and if you're not familiar with HTML, you'll soon see a very basic example of how to create an HTML file. So these are the elements of an HTML file, the essentially mandatory elements. You need to have the HTML tag, I guess you can call it, followed by, inside of the HTML tag you need a head, and also inside HTML you need to have a body. The head will allow you to have things like a title for your web page, so you can say, you know, my first web app, and this title, my first web app, will actually appear in the right here in the tab name. It'll show as the title, as saying my first web app. And the body, let's just do a simple message saying, you know, this is my user login page. Very, very simple page that I've created here. So now I don't think this will work. If I just refresh this, yeah, it's not actually finding and forwarding to the index.jsp. So I need to configure that. So this is the fun part, ladies and gentlemen. One thing I know I need to do is I need to forward it so that it knows to go to the JSP folder inside of WebInf to look for views, and I believe that's inside of the web XML file. Let me poke around here. Dispatcher servlet. Again, I should have been more prepared for this, but I think it's probably beneficial for you guys to see the raw stuff as I try to get this up and running. I believe what I need is to put something inside of the... Does it need to be inside the dispatcher servlet? See, I don't do this very often, so... what I could do is sneak over into one of my other projects where I've already set this up. But you guys don't have, or you likely don't have a project already set up with this stuff, so that might not be a good idea. So let me do a little bit of Google searching and see if the dispatcher servlet setup here is what I need. So let me look for Spring dispatcher servlet. Let me do, I don't know, setup maybe, or configuration. I saw that pop up. So let's see, dispatcher servlet example. Why not? So this is kind of what I'm looking for. Servlet mapping. So it tells me what the URL pattern is, and I believe in the URL pattern I can say /JSP, you know, /*.html or something like that. So that's a servlet mapping. So they've defined a servlet here, which is the dispatcher servlet, which is what we have here configured, and here's the servlet mapping. So this servlet name has to match the servlet name up here, which is my first web app. See how they did the same thing? Dispatcher here matches the where'd it go? The servlet name here, dispatcher. So I have the same name here and here, and this is servlet name URL pattern. So the URL pattern here is just /. So I can't. I wonder if this is the right location or not for what I want to do. Let me keep scrolling down. See, this is what I want. So okay, so this goes along with the view resolver. So let me leave this the same for now, and let me set up a view resolver like they've done here, and this is inside of their dispatcher servlet. So where is, but that's referencing a bean idea view resolver that already exists. I don't believe, do I have a come on now. Let's see, where did I comment out? So I commented that out here because it was looking for a tiles view resolver. So I need to get first a good example of a URL-based view resolver. So let me type that in, Spring URL-based view resolver. So this isn't a good example. It's just the actual API for it, so that's not. Sometimes that helps people, but I don't work well off of just the APIs. I need a good example, copy paste, and run with it, which is what I usually do. Because this is stuff you set it up once and then you're good to go. URL-based view resolver, dispatcher. Bean ID view resolver. So this looks like what I'm looking for. So I have the URL-based view resolver. They named the bean as a view resolver. The view class is a JSTL view. And you even give a prefix and a suffix. I mean, that looks promising. But again, trial and error is how I go about doing it. So we'll see if it works. Let me just format this nicely. Actually, I think I can do Control-Shift-F and it'll format it. There you go. Take away some. This is just me being picky, with my formatting of my beans. So I think actually that's pretty good. So you see that other people use this webimp/JSP sort of approach. So there's my view resolver. I think I'm happy with that. Let me save it. And in here I can leave that as it was. And let me restart my server and see how that goes. So you can hopefully see the kind of strategies that I'm employing to figure out what it is I need to figure out. It helps that I've done this a few times in the past where I know I've had to have some sort of URL-based view resolver. I had that gut feeling. And so that I just went to look for examples of URL-based view resolvers. So who knows if this will work? Was there any errors? No, there weren't any errors. So let's give this a shot. There you go. Beautiful. So what it's doing here is, I think because I named it index, it automatically looks for an index file when I navigate here, and I can challenge that by hitting F2 here and renaming the index file to something completely not index.jsp. And I don't think I need to reboot the server. Let me try to. So there you go. So I've renamed the file. The common web technology will always look for the /index file. So if you don't have one, then it's just going to throw that error. But because I had the index file, it found it and it puts me there, right? I believe you can also change this with Spring. I thought I saw an example from one of these guys, and I think here it's the welcome file. So you can actually specify what welcome file you want to use. If you don't want to use index.jsp, you want to use hello world.jsp or something, you could actually configure that yourself, and that'll be inside of your web XML. But for me, I just leave it as index.jsp. I'm okay with the default behavior, so that's great. So, beautiful. Now we're in a situation where we are able to hit this URL, and we get forwarded to our actual page. And you see now the title here is My First Web App, like I set up in the index.jsp, in the title, My First Web App. My First Web App. And then inside the body, we have this is my user login page, which shows right here. Great. So now our next step is we want to actually have a username and password boxes, input boxes, with maybe a submit button, so that we can actually submit our credentials and see if they are valid or not. So let's build that up. But first, what I like, or what I always picture in my mind, is things called controllers, and I've touched on this inside of the document, maybe even a little bit in my last video on how to build a web app. When I want to be able to navigate to this URL, and instead of this just going directly to the JSP and displaying what's in the JSP, I kind of want to do something called intercepting. I want to intercept this is called a request. When you say enter and or refresh, when you go to this URL, you're requesting to see that page. So the request will go out, and I want to kind of intercept the request and say, well, hold on, because they're going to this index.jsp file, or at least they want to go there, first I want you to go to my Java technology, my Spring framework technology, and I want you to go to the controller and figure out if there's anything more that we should do or that we should pass in that would be helpful before we actually show this page. And why I want to do that now is I want to go to the controller, and I want to have the controller pass in something called a model. And the model will be using the user's file that we've set up, the user's domain object that we've set up, because we want to have that sort of being backing our page, so that when I type in a username and a password and I say submit, it will go and populate this user object or user's object with a username and a password, and maybe even an email. I guess I should include that too. So it'll automatically populate our Java object, and then we can use our Java object in Java land and check and see in our database if the username exists and if there's a password that matches and if it's valid or whatever, right? That's all going to be part of the Java land. This right now is sort of the HTML land, the presentation layer. So I want to be able to tie the presentation layer up with our domain stuff, our business layer, if you will, and then forward it to the data layer to see if the data is valid. So that's the sort of big picture concept that I'm looking at right now, or at least that I'm thinking about. So let's do that. Now, before I go crazy and start messing around with controllers and whatnot, I want to do one thing first, and this is a consequence of having Spring Roo construct everything for us. If you go to the controller, the user's controller that was created when we created our Spring Roo web app here, it's using something called aspect J. So if you hover over this little orange arrow guy here, you see that there's 9 aspect J markers at this line. And what aspect J does is it essentially it does something, I think it's called weaving. It weaves in lines of code when your program is running. So there's essentially two I don't know what you would call it, states of being for a program. There's the compile time and the run time of a program. So compile time is sort of like now when I stop the server, compile time is right now. I'm typing stuff in, and at compile time, this will say, okay, I've tried to compile this file, and no, there's a syntax error here. This is not correct. So we're just compiling the code. We're not running it. We're just creating it. That's compile time. Now, runtime is when I actually click the run button here and the application will launch. At runtime, aspect J kicks in, and it will actually put in lines of code here that you don't see at compile time. Some people love that, and there's definitely very good uses for aspect J. I won't get into them now. One big one is having transactions, but I don't want to talk about transactions right now. Aspect J is helpful, but not in so much as the Roo stuff that it does, and I'll show you exactly what I mean here. I'm going to take out essentially the aspect J stuff with respect to the Roo framework, and I'm going to take it out of its hiding spot, which I'm not going to get into, and show you the code once I've sort of pushed it back in. So as you can see, there's nothing here, right? User's controller, there's no code. And I'm not a fan of that because I like to see the code that's going to happen. I don't want to have to go jump through some hoops to see the code. So I think you go to you'll have to go to refactor, and you only have to do this once. Once you set up your Spring Roo thing, your Spring Roo project. I would recommend doing this once you're done creating all of your domain objects. Once you've created all of them that you want to use, because like a Spring Roo is very helpful for creating those quickly and getting all the code in that you need to get in. Where to go? So I go to refactor, and you go push in. So this will show you all of the aspects that are actually related to Roo that I'm now going to push into my actual code. So when I say OK here, there you go. So now this, which was previously empty, is now chock full of code. And that stuff was sort of hidden, and you can see the aspect J marker line, little green arrow thing, is now gone. So it's now pushed all this in. You can see there's a bunch of functionality here that this user's controller has that you actually weren't seeing before. There's a way to see it, but it's a little bit confusing. So that's just something to note that you need to kind of do once you're done using Spring Roo and you want to just carry on with the actual coding itself. So, oops, sorry, this is here. I previously I did a recording, about an hour's worth of recording, and I lost all of the recording stuff, which was fantastic. So I'm doing this for the second time through, so I actually have a better idea of where I'm going now, so that's good. I just have to delete this project there. That was the old one. So, getting back on topic, I have put all this in here now, and I don't want to confuse you guys with all this code. It's not difficult code once you understand how it all works, but since it's a little overwhelming to see that all at once now, so let me take it all out and start with just a nice empty starting point for our controller here. So we have a user's controller, and like I said, this is what's going to interface between when someone sends off the request, which just means, hitting refresh or hitting the enter key. The request, I want to have it intercepted by this controller. Okay? So first thing we need to do is annotate our object here with the controller annotation. This was already there from Spring Roo. I got rid of everything else except for that, because that's kind of like the baseline for this stuff. And what we need to do is we need to specify a method that we will create that will be called when we navigate to this website address. So let's do that. We just create a standard method. You can name it whatever you like. I'll name it handle get, or handle request, I guess you could say. And always pass in a model map. That's something that's part of the Spring framework, and it's very useful, which you'll see in a few moments. And I'm going to return a view. So this is what will be returned from the controller. And index directly relates to where to go? Here, this index file here, which you know all about. So, but before we can continue here, we need to specify how we're going to, when we should intercept the request and actually execute this method. Because right now, with just the plain old method, nothing's going to happen. No magic is going to happen. So we can actually specify request mapping, okay, where the value is a path, a URL path, and since this is kind of like the base URL that we're hitting, this slash here represents this slash here. If I typed in, users, then I would have to match that with users and navigate to that point for this code to intercept the request. So since I just want to do the basic my first web app, then I have to just say slash, and I put a comma because I also want to specify what the method is, which is just a get. Okay. So there's two methods, get and post. Get and post. But the get is what we're doing right now, because get is sort of like when you actually hit the refresh or hit the enter key. That's called a get. A post is something that happens when you actually submit a form on a website. Like if you have a username and password on the website and you say submit, that's a post. So this is the get. So when we run that, it should hopefully hit. When we navigate to this URL, it should intercept it and then throw us into this and return the index view. So let me put a breakpoint here and start up my server in in debug mode, which is down here, this little bug guy. And actually, I think depending on my level of logging, okay, I don't have a. If I had the debug level of logging on, you would see that Spring has determined that I want to intercept this URL pattern and point it to this method. And you'll see that it actually says that if I had the debug turned on, the debug logging, I should say. And actually, let me do that for the sake of argument. Let me go to my log4j properties. Let me switch to the source view because I like it better. And you can change the root logger to be debug. And then I'll show you, next time I reboot the server, I'll show you that I guess it'll reboot it for me. There you go. It detected the change and rebooted the server. So now you can get a whole bunch more stuff in your log. So if I search for users controller, is this the one I'm looking for? Yes. So you can see here it's actually info level, so I don't need debug level on, I just need info. You see that it's mapped just a / URL pattern with a get, and it's on the users controller handle request method, which takes a model map, which is fantastic. That's exactly what I want. Now let me set this to info level so I don't have to have a whole crapload of mess in my logs here. So that's perfect. That's what we want. Now let me. Server will reboot because I changed the logging level again. Now let me do the magic. Let me hit the enter key and hopefully it hits the breakpoint and it intercepts my my call, and it has. So you see now it's hit a breakpoint in here, and it's going to return just the index view. So if I just let this play through, you'll notice that nothing happens on the front end. Nothing is different conceptually, except for the fact that we've now taken this detour into Java land to do this code here, which is very powerful stuff. So let me switch back to my regular view, not my debug view, because I want to now do something a little bit different, or a little bit extra, I should say. I want to populate this model with something, with a users object. Okay, so let me do that now, and I can say, so I'm going to instantiate a users object, users, and I am going to put that on the model. So you do model.put, and it wants a key and a value, so I'm going to do, the key is, we'll call it users, and the value is the actual users object. So this is just a key, this is just like a string representation of what I want to call the users object. So maybe for the sake of showing you what's what, let me call this just a user. And then you'll see where I use users and where I use user. I need to restart my server because I did that. So, yeah. So now I'm putting this users object onto the model, calling it user, and throwing it into the index web page, or JSP page. So, how can I then use this users Java object in my index.jsp? Well, you can use something called a tag library. So let me hop over to Google real quick, and I'll show you what I mean. If I look for the Spring Form tag library, example, I guess. And let me do Spring 3.0. There is a great set of resources on the Spring Source website. They have great resources for this stuff. So I will go here. I'd highly recommend checking out this documentation whenever you get stuck. I prefer the 3.0 as opposed to 2.0 because that's the version that we're using. So let me see if I can find an example of the sort of the tag library import that I want to do. Now, is this the one? Do I want to use the Spring? I don't think I want to use Spring. I want to use the form tag library. Are there any other references in here? There aren't. That's interesting, because I think the 2.0 has... Yeah, the 2.0 has the line I'm looking for, the import for the tag library. Not sure why that is, but I don't really want to get into that right now. But like I said, I would prefer the 3.0 documentation over the 2.0, just because you might get the wrong idea of what you should use if you look at the 3.0 stuff. But I know this is correct. I know I want to use the form tag library, so I will do that. So when I do that, I'm now able to reference something called a form, or at least a Spring form, in my HTML. And this will allow me to hook up with my controller and use this that I put on the model, this user that I put on the model. So, and I do that by saying form, and believe it or not, I say form twice, and do it like that. And then it has two required, I think, parameters. One is method, so you're specifying post, because this form, I will be submitting this form, and it's a post. And I need a, command name. And now this command name will be the name of the object that I have on my model here, which is user. Okay, that's kind of like the user object is what we want to be populating. This user's object here is what we want to be populating inside of our JSP. So since that's the case, we put it as the command name. And then inside of here, we can say form input, which makes an input box, and the path is username. And so why did I say username in here? Well, the path represents what the command object is dealing with. Like the command object we're dealing with is user, which is just the key that points to this user's object. And the user's object, if I control click on it, has a username, password, and email. Okay, so this is the username. This is the path that it's referring to. Okay, it's the same thing as saying user.username. Okay, where user is the user's object and username represents the get username. Okay, so essentially what Spring does is it takes this and essentially turns it into users.get username. Okay, it's complex enough to understand that that's what we mean here. Okay, it will actually turn it into this statement, which is what we use in Java to get the username. So that's what it does. It's great, and it works both ways. It does the getter and the setter, so it knows to set it appropriately when we're doing the actual post, or it knows to get it if we're displaying the web page. So it's really powerful stuff. So for the password, you can actually choose password as a type, and that we can do that because what it is it just uses an input box, but it kind of masks what you type in. So it's what you would expect a password box to do. It shields other people from seeing what your password is. And then I think we had an email address, which we can just say form input path equals, what did I call it? Just email, okay? Equals email. And then we can do an input box and say it's a submit. And we need a value, which I guess we can say login. That's what it'll say on the screen. Okay, so now we've done all that. And let's give us a refresh here. Oh, I still have the breakpoint set. Let me take off the breakpoint and let it play through. And there you go. So we have username, password, email, and a login button. And I forgot to put in line breaks. Let me put in some line breaks to make it look a little bit better. Break, and break. Save. And refresh. There we go. So, username, password, email. Fantastic. Now, let me hold on a second. So the next step here is when we click on the actual login button, I'm expecting there to be an error because all we've set up in our actual controller is just a get request method. So when I click login, it's going to actually do a post, which is what we specified in the form. The form will post. Okay, so this here is my form. And you can actually take a look at that. If you hit F12, if you're using Chrome or Firefox, you can actually inspect the HTML. And if you go and if I just hover over form here, you see what it highlights on the screen. So what's highlighted is username, password, email, and login. So that's my user form. Okay. So when I type some stuff in and say login, it's going to do a post, and the controller doesn't have a post method yet. So it just said this post is not supported. So let's implement a post method so that it can handle a post in the controller. So I usually just copy paste from my getter because I'm a little lazy and change it to a post. And instead of saying handle request, you can name it, handle post. And let's clear this stuff out. So there you go. That's. Let me restart the server. That's pretty much as simple as it needs to be to implement a post. But this post now, it doesn't do anything other than just it'll refresh essentially the page and put you back to the index page. So if I say enter, I'm still booting up. Let's let it boot up before I continue talking. So if I just type stuff in and then say log in, it just throws me, it tried to and it failed. Probably because the user, never mind. It was expecting a user to be on the model because in here I have a user from the command name. It tried to reload this page again with no user on the command name, on the model, sorry. Because in the getter we put it on the model, but here we don't. So anyway, I'm getting off topic. This won't do anything, so we need to make it do something, obviously. So what is it that we want it to do? Well, we want it to take the information that we typed in here and figure out if the user that we're typing in is indeed a valid user. Okay? So let me quickly show you how that's done. Since we have a user that's in the model, we can pull that model in. Actually, is it already available in this model? I wonder. Usually I do this through other means, but maybe you can do it through the model that's already there. This might not be best practice, but I'm just curious to see if it's in the model, because I keep saying model, so I would like to see that the information is indeed inside of this model. So I put a debug or breakpoint there. I'm starting it in debug mode, and I will refresh the website. So still booting, we're good. Let me close this window here. So let me type in, tpage, a password, and an email, whatever, and say login. And let me hover over model and see what we have in here. So it doesn't look like we have anything in there. So that's interesting. Why wouldn't it have anything? I don't have a good reason right now off the top of my head. What I can tell you, though, is that the way to pull the data in that you typed in here is to use something called a model attribute. Okay? So I just typed in model there, and then I hit Control Space, and it figures it out. And you need to name it what your model attribute is named, which is really the command name here, which is just user. So it's called user, and it represents a user's object, right? So now, if I were to put the breakpoint back in there and restart in debug mode, am I restarting in debug mode? Hopefully I am. We shall see. I'll show you that this model attribute actually will be populated with what we're typing in on the front end, which is very cool and very powerful stuff. Because the whole point here is that I want to be able to pass stuff from my presentation layer onto my business layer, my actual domain stuff, my domain behavior. So let me type stuff in, log in. And if I just hover over this, you see I have an email now, I have a password, and I have a username. So that's awesome. We've now typed stuff in here in the presentation layer, submitted, and then captured that information right directly into a nice plain old Java object for us to deal with. So that makes our lives so much easier with respect to the coding that we now need to do. So what do we need to do now? Well, we need to look at the user's object and validate if that user does indeed exist. Okay? So let's let that play through. And let's stop and let's get out of debug mode. So this is where we now get on to things like services and the data layer. Okay? So I want to create a service now that will sort of take my user's object, make sure that the data in there is valid, and then pass it on to my data layer to see if the user does indeed exist in our database. Okay? And so here's how I create a user service. I just type it in like this, and you'll see that it's underlined in red because it doesn't exist. But if you just hover over it, you can say create class user service, and you can just create the class right from there. And I will put it in the service package and say finish, and there you go. It creates a service for us. Fantastic. And I can even do something like this. I can then say users service dot is valid user, and I can pass in users, and I want it to give me back a boolean. Okay, and if I type all this stuff in, so user service exists, but the is valid user method doesn't, right? Because it just created an empty user service object. If I hover over this and say create method, like so, look at that. It creates a method, it passes in exactly what I'm passing in, or at least it creates the parameter argument list for us. It sets the return type to Boolean because we asked for it as a Boolean here. And it just, by default does return false because it's auto-generated. But that's great. Now that I'm done that, I've implemented my service. It doesn't do anything, but I've implemented the code anyway, so that's kind of cool. And what should this service do? Well, it should first check and make sure that the users is not null, because if it's null, we want to return false. So we don't want to have any null pointers being thrown here. If the user is null, then clearly we don't have a valid user, so false. If users.getUsername equals null, or let's say they don't enter a username at all, dot length equals 0, return false. And you can do the same thing for password. Get password equals null. Then return false. That's kind of some, basic validation on the object to make sure, it's got some actual values that we can use. And since we've sanitized that and it looks good, we can then pass it along to our data access layer, which doesn't exist yet. So let's create something called a user's DAO, where DAO stands for data access object. And you see there's this kind of methodology we've got going here. Users controller, users service, now users DAO. Controller, service, DAO. It's just a convention in Java to name our objects like that. So, same thing, we type it in, we hover over, we create the class. Let's put it in its own package called DAO. There you go. Now, let's create a method inside of users DAO. Let's call it, for the lack of better term. So I actually want to return the result of our query of the database, because the whole point here is we need to query the database to see if this user exists, right? So let me create that method. So now it's done. Right now it's just returning false, but we'll change that in a second. This is now happy because it's done everything it needs to do. And let's say if the user is valid, we'll return a different view. We'll send them to like a welcome screen to say, like, welcome, you've logged in, you're a valid user, congratulations. So if they're valid, we'll do that. If they're not valid, we'll just throw them back into the standard view that we've created, the index. And I believe we'll also need to populate a model, because I remember seeing that it didn't work when you didn't have a model. Now do I want to put the same one back on? Yeah, sure, why not? So what happens now? Let's reboot and see what we've got going. So what'll happen is when we post, when we say submit or log in, it'll create a user service, it'll check to see if it's valid. When it checks to see if it's valid, it will go inside of the isValidUser, and it shouldn't return false here because the users will actually be populated with something. It'll create a DAO, and then it'll go in and execute the isValidUser, which just returns false. So then it'll return false back, and it says, okay, this is false, throw that back in here, and then it'll set this to be false, which means it'll go into the else and throw us back into our regular page. So let's see what actually happens. Log in. There you go. So you see that it's maintained the username and the email that we typed in, right? And that was because I put the same user's object back into the model. Okay. If I didn't want it to retain the username and email that we typed in, I could just say new users. Okay. So if we make a new users object, what does that do? Well, it will instantiate a new users object with an empty username, empty password, and empty email. So now what I should expect to see is when I log in with someone who's invalid, I'll just see blank, blank, blank. Okay? So let's see if that's true. Let me type this in and say login, and there you go, they're all blank. And that's because I've instantiated a new users object and put that into the model. Okay? But for the sake of argument, let's leave the existing users object on the model, because I kind of like that, so that it retains the information. And you also saw that it didn't retain the password, so that's kind of a neat functionality of the password object, or password, what would you call this? HTML element. So, what to do next? Well, okay, let me stop there and say I've now shown you how to interface your front end, your presentation layer, with your Java code, and showing you how you can pass things along to a new service that you can create and have it sanitize the data and try to access stuff from the data layer, which is really cool. I will say one more thing before I switch into my data layer talk, and that is to talk about the Spring framework. Because right now with this line of code, my new user DAO, I'm instantiating an object inside of another object, okay, which to me screams tight coupling. So this is a tight coupling I've spoken about in the ebook, and if you don't know what I mean when I say in the ebook, if you're just watching this on YouTube because you stumbled upon it on YouTube, you can just click on the link in the YouTube video description, and that will forward you to the ebook that I'm talking about. This video is actually part of the bonus content of the ebook that you will get when you purchase the ebook itself. So just wanted to clear that up so that you understand what I'm talking about when I say ebook. So in the ebook, I talked about coupling and how coupling is bad. We don't like tight coupling. We like loose coupling. So how do we know that we have coupling? Well, like I said, when we have one object instantiated inside of another object, like the user's DAO being instantiated inside of the user's service, that's not exactly very good, because if ever I make any changes to the user DAO object, like let's say I change a constructor, or I take the constructor away so that there's no constructor that takes no arguments. Maybe I only have a constructor that takes, a string argument or something like that. Now it'll break, right? You'll get something like this. It'll underline it and say, hey, you have the wrong number of arguments or something. So that's not cool. We don't want to break, our user service when we change our user DAO. So Spring has a nifty little concept, or a nifty little technology that allows us to decouple our objects, and that's called wiring. So if I just move this line of code up, if I hit Alt and then up, I can move this into the instance variable zone of our code, and I can actually take away the instantiation of this object, okay? And if I just leave it like this, I'll get a null pointer exception, because I haven't instantiated this, so this will throw a null pointer. But if I say auto-wired, and I do Control-Shift-O to automatically do my import, you see that it's part of the Spring framework, this auto-wired annotation. So what this will do is now Spring will see that I've annotated this with at auto-wired, and it will scan all my objects to see if I have a DAO object, or a repository object named users DAO. Okay, so I don't yet because I haven't done it. So let me fire myself over to users DAO. I can actually also annotate this with at repository. Okay, and you see it's also part of the Spring framework. When I put this annotation here to mark this as a repository object or a DAO object, those two names are used interchangeably. Repository is equal to DAO and vice versa. When I do that, I've marked it as such, and Spring will realize that when I'm asking for it to be auto-wired in the service, it knows that the DAO is an actual bean that I've declared as a repository bean, so it'll instantiate it properly in such a way that it's not coupled. So that's really cool, and it actually uses something. It uses aspect J to do that, but that's an advanced topic. So I also did the same thing here. I instantiated a user service in my controller. So same thing. I do Alt up, and put it here. I get rid of the instantiation of it. I say at auto-wired. And now for the service, I need to mark this as a service. Control-Shift-O to do the import. And now it's marked as a service. So now it will automatically put that in as a bean so that it recognizes it when I'm doing the auto import. So that's really cool. So now my server's been rebooting like crazy because I've been changing things. Let me retest my application to make sure that it still functions the way I expect it to function, and it does. So that's great. So fantastic. I've shown you how to do how to create a repository object or a DAO object using the Spring annotation, which I would highly recommend, as well as a service, using a service annotation, and how you can use the auto wired to automatically decouple your objects, but still have them usable. Yeah, I've shown you how to do the sort of the intercepting of URL patterns here with the request mapping annotations. So, very cool stuff. If you've never seen this before, it's definitely going to be a little bit confusing, but that's okay. If you've never seen this before, I would be shocked if you weren't lost in this whole thing, because it's a lot of information. So it's okay to slow down. You can watch this video over and over again. You can go to the Spring documentation. Oops, I should have done that. How would I get to the Spring documentation? If I were to go here, Spring source. Okay, get started maybe. Tutorial, go to tutorials. Oh, they have some video tutorials, nice. Anyway, I would just probably do a Google search and say, Spring source 3.0 documentation. So, documentation, Spring framework, and HTML reference manual. There you go, beautiful. So there's the URL if you need to find it, and here's all the topics that they cover. So it's really cool. If you really want to sit down and spend a lot of time going through all this stuff in Spring and learning as much as you can, I would recommend it, because there's a lot of information, but it's very useful information. And if you can't handle it and you can't take it, then that's what I'm here for, right? That's why I'm doing these things, to help show you the practical side of creating a web application. So now, the next thing that I want to talk about, and it's actually something that I haven't already gone through yet, at least in a little while, is the data layer configuration. Okay? Because right now, if you go and drill down, you do a control click on the user service and you control click on the DAO, all it's doing is saying return false. So no matter what username and password you type in, you'll always have an invalid user, which is not what we want. We want to actually look into our database to see if a user exists with the name that we've typed in and the password that we've typed in. And if they do, then we want to say, yes, they are a valid user, and allow them to log into our system. So, this will require some Google searching, and this will require some configuration changes for the setup stuff that I have. And I think it was in the... Where was it that I need to poke into? Spring? It's the application context. Where are you hiding application context? Come now. I'll just do Control-Shift-R. Application context. Much easier. I can click this guy to see where it's hiding. Ah, it's in the resources, of course. So this guy has something called a JPA transaction manager and an entity manager factory, which is here, a local container entity manager factory bean. Now, I wonder if I could just use this entity manager factory. I wonder if I can use this example. Spring 3.0. Let's see what we got. Here's a POM file. That's not what we want to look at. Application structure. So there's the database. So they have a car as an entity object, whereas we have a user. Users is our entity object. See how they have an entity annotation here on the car? That represents something in the JavaX or JavaX persistence technology to say that this object should be should represent a table in the database. Okay, repository, entity manager, persistence context. I've never actually used the entity manager, the GPA stuff, so you'll have to bear with me. But I've never used it before, and I'm curious to use it now. So let's do that. Let's just dive in and use the entity manager, because I already have it defined on my application context. This entity manager it represents it has my data source in it, and my data source is my database. Okay, so we have a basic data source here, and we've named it data source, and it has the username and password and URL that we set up in our database properties file over here, which I explained earlier. So that connects to our database, database itself. So the entity manager factory will be able to talk to my data source, okay? And I want to be able to do that so that I can talk to my data source and say, hey, is there a user that exists in the database right now with the given username and password? So I'll be able to do that by using the entity manager factory. And apparently this example shows me how I can do it. So I want to do that. So let's try to implement that. Let me just copy this stuff. How do I view the code? Yeah. Let me grab that and put that into my user DAO code. Okay. Let me do Control-Shift-O to do my imports. And what do we have here? Oh, sorry, it shouldn't have a... That should be on the... Oh, geez, everything should be... I pasted it in the wrong spot completely. My apologies. Control-Shift-O again. See, I've never used this query before. I'm assuming... Well, I can check and see. Do they have... Where's query? Java X persistence query. So I should choose Java X persistence query next. This should be a Java util. Yes. Okay. Then the only thing it doesn't have here is car, because obviously we don't have a car. We have a user. So let me move this code into here. And instead of car, I want a list of users. And if result list so what I'm doing here is we're doing a query. It's building a query to grabs from the database some information and returns it into this thing called result list. So this can be thrown away. And I'm wondering if the entity manager will automatically be set based on this annotation. Because normally I would say something like auto-wired, right? Because auto-wired, or rather I could put it here. You can actually put it in both places. You can put it in the setter or just up here. I'm wondering if this persistence context annotation shares some of the functionality that the @AutoWire does. Is there a way that I could look at it? Yeah, I really don't know. Well, I guess we'll find out, right? So let's assume that everything here is okay except for our query. This is the only part where you're going to have to know a little bit of SQL, and that's kind of a drag if you don't know SQL. But all this is doing is we want to, when we say select, we want to pull from our database some information. So select means give me stuff. And normally I like to say star, which means everything. So give me everything from, and the table that we want to grab from, if I flip over to my Toad for a second, the users table is the table I want to grab from. So, but what's interesting is I think because this is a part of the Hibernate or JPA stuff, there's a reason why this car here has a capital C, and I think that's because it refers to the actual object. So maybe I don't have to put the table name, but I put the object name here. So I wonder if it's as easy as that. Select star from users, which means give me everything from the users object, which it will translate into the users table. Okay, and it does that by looking. So when I say users here, it's going to look for a users object because I've defined it as an entity. And then inside of here, it will figure out what the table name is and what all of the columns are inside of the table. So that's all done through using the entity annotation and some other annotations that we used on our actual object. So I think we might have something here. So where was the DAO? Okay. So let me put a breakpoint here. It's give me a warning here because I think you need to cast. Let me cast this. Is this? It doesn't matter. It's gonna have me suppress the warning anyway because it's an unchecked thing. Let me put a breakpoint here and say stop and reboot the server. Okay, so from the service, we're going to get into the service, we're going to validate the data, make sure that nothing is null or anything, and then it's going to go is valid user, go in there, and then it's going to do the query, okay, which should hopefully hit our database and check and see if the user exists. So let me actually run this now, make sure nothing is broken. Okay, username, tpage, password, whatever, email, whatever. Log in. So now it's gone through all the steps and it's hit the is valid user in the data access object here. So let me hit F6 and see what happens. Interesting. I think unexpected token star. So I think there's an error. Yeah, an HQL parser error. So it didn't want me to put star. So it actually kind of threw an exception. Yeah. Okay, so, because they had said, they had select C from cars C. So I can say select U from users U. Maybe that's what they want. I'm not sure of the syntax. And again, this is all something that you would have to find out. You do a Google search and you could find out what the syntax needs to be. I'm kind of winging this right now, so I'm just going to try to follow what example they had here. They had select C from car C. So C is just something called an alias for the table that you're accessing or the object that you're accessing. So instead of having to say select car from car, you can say select C because car is named. It's like a shortcut for calling it car. It's called an alias. So let me do that same kind of idea here with my selecting from the users. Page, whatever, log in, F6. Okay, so it seems to have liked that. So we've got our query, and then what it does is it says query.getResultList. So it's got the query, and it will actually execute the query and put the results into my list of users. Okay, let's see if that works. F6. Okay, so now the result list is empty, which is actually what I expected, because what we have here is a user with a username of tpage and a password of whatever, and we don't have anything in our database right now. So it kind of makes sense that it returned 0 for our result set. So since it's 0, it says return false because it's not a valid user. And then it throws us back to the login page. So let's do some fancy stuff and put a user into our database. So let me refresh, hit F5 to run it. As you can see, there's nothing in the users table. So let me insert something into the users table. Let me insert into users email, say tpage@ecosim.ca, password, we'll just do a bunch of ASDFs, username is tpage, version is 0, let me select this and say run, okay, let me select, so now I have a row in the database, okay, again, if you don't know SQL, I apologize for all this stuff, but if you're making a web app, then you're going to have to learn SQL. So maybe I'll have a product that'll teach you how to do that. Actually, I will have a product that'll teach you how to do that, because I've been hearing a lot about people wanting to know more about SQL and more about web apps in general. So I will have something there. It'll just take me a little bit of time to record all this information. So I have something in the database. So now, if I try to log in again, let me put in the right password and the right username and say log in again. So now it has the query, it gets the result, and do we have, look at that, we have a result. So username is there, password is there, cool. Now, this is still not functioning code, because now it's going to say return true, okay? And if it returns true, the isValidUser will be true, and it'll say welcome, and I don't think I have a welcome page yet. I haven't created one, so it just throws me to a blank page. But let's not worry about that. Look at the logic here. All it's saying is select from the users table, and if there is exactly one result, then we're good. So that's not correct at all. What we want to do is we want to select from users where the username is the one that we've specified. Okay? So this is going to be a little bit tricky, because again, I'm maybe not familiar with the syntax that I should be using here, but let me give it a stab in the dark and see if I can figure it out. So select U from users where u.username equals question mark and u.password equals question mark. Set first result, set parameter. I should probably just look this stuff up, but I'm just going to be a pain in the butt and stubborn and do that and restart my server. So what have I done there? I have said I put a where clause in my query, and I said where username equals question mark, and I said question mark because that's what you do when you have something that varies. Okay, this is kind of like a variable. So the username, when they pass something in, it changes every time. So I'm saying question mark here and password question mark there, and I'm setting it at position 0, which should be the first question mark. I'm setting the username into there, so it's kind of injecting the username into this question mark at runtime. And here, set parameter 1, which should be the second question mark, I'm setting the password. Then, if we do a query and we get a hit with these two these two conditions, then we know that we've typed in the correct username and the correct password. So let's see if this works now. Tpage, correct password, whatever for the email. Let's see if this fails horribly. And it might. I might have the wrong syntax, and it looks like it did. What's strange is it's not showing me any errors, though. Yeah, it looks like there was an error, but it didn't throw the error in a way that I would have expected. So maybe that's a side effect of using the entity manager that I'm just not aware of yet. So let me just look up an example of the entity manager and doing a query. Does he have a query in here that's a little bit more complex? It doesn't look like it. No. So let me look for entity manager create query example. JPA query. Select O from my test object O where O.income. Okay, interesting. So this is how you do it. You do this syntax here with the colon and then a name of the variable. So let's do that. So let's call it colon username, and let's call it colon password. And instead of doing set parameter, what they do here is, oh, they do set parameter. My apologies. Let me put that back. And instead of saying 0, let me do username, because that's the name I've used here. And instead of 1, let me say password, because that's the name I've used here. Save that. Restart my server. And then get result list. Okay. So hopefully this one works. So instead of using, I was using the digits and question marks. Although I think I can probably still use the digits, but since we're using an actual variable name in here, we might as well make use of the variable name there instead of, randomly saying 0 or 1. So let me try this one more time. And we wait. There we go. Result list. Size. Now it didn't find it. Did I type something in incorrectly? Username tpage, password ASDF. What? Oh, I know what's going on here. So this is kind of annoying. Actually, it's a good thing this happened because now I can explain something, and it's inside of the persistence XML file. In your persistence XML file that gets created, you see here there's a property that's HD or HBM whatever. The value is create. What that means is it will create. It actually says here value create means to build the new database on each run. So each time I stop and start my server, it's going to recreate the entire database, which is okay if you want to constantly flush out your database and recreate it every time you reboot your application, which is useful when you're talking about a development type of scenario. But I don't want to do that right now. I just want to put it to update. You would never have create in your production environment where you're actually running the live application. That would be catastrophic because it would flush all of your data whenever you reboot your database or your server. So that would be terrible. So I'm going to put it to update so that it just keeps updating the database as it finds changes to any object if I change an object. So let me restart the server with that. And let me reinsert the data. As you can see, when I run this, there's nothing in there. Let me reinsert the data and then run this again. So now I see the data is in there. We are booting up, and hopefully, fingers crossed, this will actually work. So first I think I fired it up in regular mode, not in debug mode. So it's not going to hit my debug spot here and do this. But let's just take a wild stab in the dark and see if it works. So I'm going to type in an incorrect password in here, okay? And I'm going to say log in, and I'm expecting it to throw me back to the same page. It does. So now let me type in the correct password and see if we get, well, we're going to get an empty page, but let's see. And it does. So it looks like it's working now. So that's very promising. So why is it showing us an empty page? Well, that's because of the controller. If we have a valid user, it throws us to a welcome page. And as you can see, the welcome page doesn't exist in the JSP folder. So let's quickly create ourselves a welcome.jsp page. We'll type the standard HTML stuff, give it a title of welcome and a body welcome, you've successfully logged in. And yeah, that should do it. So now let's go back, tpage, type in the correct password, whatever the email address, log in. There you go, welcome, you've successfully logged in. How cool is that? Let's type in tpage2 and type in the correct password and see what happens. No, it rejects us. You know, you can type in tpage with an incorrect password and it rejects us, and you can just keep, logging in. It's not going to work until you type in the right password, and then it throws us to the correct spot. So, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. I've shown you how to create an entire web application with a login screen complete with access to a real database that now, when I reboot my server, now that I've changed the persistence XML file, it won't delete that data, and we'll actually still be able to log in properly even after we reboot the server. That's cool stuff. And it took me a little bit longer than I thought it would in terms of video length, but I think this information is very, very useful, and you're going to get a lot out of it. So as you can see, I've rebooted. Let me log in. There you go. I still exist in the system. If you type in something incorrectly, it throws you back to this page. All right. I hope that's been very helpful. If you have any questions or concerns, by all means, send me an email at tpage@ecosim.ca. That is tpage@ecosim.ca. I'll be happy to answer your questions, and or you can go to my website, which I guess I can just show you here, at http://howtoprogramwithjava.com. You can go into any of the posts and click on one and scroll down to the bottom and leave me a comment with your name, email, and everything, and I will respond to you through that as well. All right? So, thank you very much for tagging along, and I hope you have learned tons. Take care.